So good morning. I think everyone who is in the kind of UK or maybe European time zone, there might be some other people joining from Asia. Uh, who knows, maybe there'll be some people joining from the US and South America, etc. Right now, maybe it's too early for all of you, but we're probably going to be joining later. But if you watch this recording later, welcome to the first edition of the Algo2020 conference. It's a conference hosted by the UCL AI Center. It's an online conference, and I guess it's becoming more and more common these days with the whole COVID-19 situation we're all experiencing in different contexts. This conference started a few months ago, and our key goal was to bring together different key stakeholders from industry, civil society, and academia to have a conversation about the upcoming disruptions that is going to happen in this, probably in this decade. We are very proud to have Cisco as one of our key partners, UCL, Holistic AI, UCL AI Insights, and UCL AI Center fronting this event. Just want to start with the impact. So by today, we got about 1,000 delegates in total. 50 plus speakers are going to be joining this conference. We have 20 plus partners. I'm very proud to say that because we started this whole adventure 3 months ago or so, and we managed to, in 2-3 weeks, gather together all these attendants from 50 plus countries, 50% outside the UK. It's a global audience. I'm kind of showing you the map where some people may join us today from different cities across the globe. I think we managed to create something that we were thinking to do only in the UK or maybe Europe. We managed to create this very huge audience across the world. So we have all possible continents, and I hope we can get even bigger the next time. So what's the Algo 2020? We have different mottos, as you could see on the website, but I think our key drive force is that we want to, first of all, be where the next generation of AI leaders will convene. So we want to have at the same time very people who has already created the field or has moved forward the field, but we also have to have the young generations, the people who are coming to be the next ones. We also want to bring together the 3 key pillars to our event, which is the civil society, academia, and industry. Civil society, we are happy to have been partnering with the Knowledge for All Foundation, the Office for Statistics Regulation, Center for Data Ethics and Innovation, HMRC, a lot of other partners. On academia, our flagship partner is UCL and UCL AI Center, but we also have the support of the Alan Turing Institute and Imperial College London. And for industry, we're happy to host an event with Conception X, which is a deep tech incubator in the UK. So it's fostering the new generation of startups, deep tech startups. We have Fujitsu and Cisco as also our flagship partner. The organization is basically, I guess, all of you have received an email from Emre Kazin. I guess probably a deluge of emails from him. I apologize on his behalf. It was myself, in fact, sending the emails with his name. So apologies for it. You're probably going to receive more today, so prepare yourself for that. We discovered a few things that Zoom can do and Zoom cannot do. So you're probably going to receive some new links to join some of the sessions, but I'll keep you all informed as we go along. Okay. And I'm Adriano Koshiyama. I was responsible for the marketing and finance of the conference. We are very happy to have a very broad and also deep in terms of knowledge advisory board. We have Shakil Khan from Validate AI. Professor David Barber will be also speaking in about a few minutes. We have Professor Randy Gobo, Professor Philip Treleven, Grasa is also a key sponsor, and Lucas Spruch from the Turing, and Kiki will be doing a keynote speak later today. We have several partners, and I'm very proud to highlight all of them over here. And I suspect that going forward, we're probably going to increase the size of this family and try to make them contribute as much as we can. We are very, very proud to have had Cisco to representing the industry, UCL and Imperial College for Academia, Knowledge for All Foundation, Validate AI, etc., as representing civil society. But we're also happy to partner with the Climate Change AI group, with the UCL AI Society, etc. It was a good adventure. So just to give you a little bit of a glimpse of the agenda for today. So we're going to start today with this welcome. I'll be speaking now, and then Professor David will be speaking for the next 10-15 minutes as well, introducing the AI Center. Then we're going to start with the first keynote speaker, How AI is Making Decisions About You, done by Dr. Kiki Lotner. After that, we have the first parallel session of the day. We have Building Deep Tech Startups During PhD, hosted by Conception X. Data Has Shape and Shape Has Meaning, done by Cisco. And Fake Till You Make It, Hype and AI, done by UCL Sensor Technology Studies. We have a lunch break at 12 to 1 p.m. After that, we join the second parallel sessions, Algorithms Running Amok, done by Holistic AI, which is our group. Challenges in Operationalizing Fairness, done by the CDI, the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation. And finally, the AI in Science, Industry and Society, done by the UCL AI Center. We have another panel. The panel is on adopting standards and frameworks to validate AI, which is done by our Validate AI partners, which will be bringing together people from industry, academia, and so on to talk about how can you create standards and frameworks to validate AI, which is going to become a key topic in our views for this decade. After that, we have our third parallel sessions on law tech, done by our collaborator Jeremy from Resilience Partners, using AI to measure and augment training in coach of leaders, done by Beth Porter from Esme Learning and Riff Analytics. It's a big team from MIT, Harvard talking about this, and operationalizing AI standards, done by the Alan Turing Institute, which Lucas will be hosting with several speakers from Oxford, Cambridge, etc. We end our event with a final parallel sessions on AI financial service, done by Janet Adams, and bringing a very, very brilliant roster of speakers. We have another session on building ethical frameworks to balance risk and innovation. And we have another parallel session on tackling climate change with machine learning. That closes our, let's say, the different strands of our event, as I said to you, academia, industry, and civil society. We finally close our event with a final panel on the roadmap to 2030, AI in the next decade. We have a panel discussing that and what the pathways and the things are coming, and then finalize the whole event with some closing remarks. Remember to join the algo.co/agenda so you can find more details and can register for those sessions. I have a special thanks for our awesome speakers right now. Very many thanks for all of them for the support and for the putting time to organize their own sessions. Final acknowledgements. First of all, thanks Professor David and Sarah Bentley from the UCL Center for providing us the support, technical, and also the resource support that you have allocated to us. Laura Bovo and Mariana Trejo from UCL Innovation Enterprise for the funding of our initiatives. Professor Philip Trelebman for sponsoring us, our activities. UCL Faculty of Engineering, SAS Department, and alumni for spreading this event through other networks and backing us. Ravit from Packbooks, thanks for all the support and also spreading the news through your network. Lon from Data Lichier and Pierre Stubbs from the Royal Statistical Society Data Science section for also doing some advertisement, and all the seed donations to help establish the Standards Lab. I think I'm very glad that for all the people has donated to help us maybe just kickstart a website or use this money to do other small activities for it. On that note, I will just stop sharing my screen and I'll pass the host to Professor David so he can start his presentation. Thank you all for that. I'm just opening the floor to Professor Dave for his initial remarks to our event. I think you need to unmute yourself. That's another.
Great. Hopefully you can see my screen, folks. So yeah, thanks Adriano and Emma for organizing this. It's really a fantastic event. I thought it might be interesting, if you don't mind, just to spend a few minutes telling you a little bit about UCL and in particular the AI Center. I think this will help you perhaps understand a little bit where we're coming from and why we're organizing these kinds of events. So I'll only spend perhaps 10 minutes or so on this. So the center was founded actually last year, 2019, and the reason was that actually UCL, whilst it's just founded this thing, actually has a much longer history in AI itself, going back certainly over 20 years. And some of the leading figures in AI and machine learning actually have passed through UCL or are still at UCL. So for example, Jeff Hinton, he's one of the sort of fathers, if you like, of deep learning. He was here at the Gatsby Institute, one of our sister institutes here. He's very instrumental in deep learning and things like the Boltzmann machine. Peter Dayan, again, one of our sister institutes, is a sort of leading figure in the development of reinforcement learning. And John Shaw Taylor has been a sort of pioneer of the mathematics of machine learning. So UCL's been actually very instrumental from the early days in AI, and we really want to sort of keep that going. We really feel that UCL and also actually more broadly in academia, we have a lot left to do, and we really want to try to help push the field forward. UCL itself, for those of you who don't know, is a university in central London. It was founded in the 1800s, actually on very strong ethical principles, supported by utilitarian philosophers like Jeremy Bentham. And actually was the first British university to fully accept women here to get a degree. So we're very keen to do practical support for things like social development, global education, etc. It's really part of our core DNA as a university. So UCL itself has a much broader strategy called AI for People and Planet to address those kinds of social and ethical and environmental challenges that the world is facing, and to do that through AI. So the AI Center itself sits in the computer science department, which is also then connected, of course, to other groups across UCL who are also doing AI, people in neurosciences and statistics, but also in the social sciences as well. And we view the AI Center as a way to really help sort of bind these different parts of the university together. And if you like, the AI Center itself is sort of the creative engine for the actual AI algorithms that some of the other centers might be actually applying in their work. So we opened last September, and it was very much thanks to Cisco and DeepMind, two of our founding partners, that helped us to do that. And in normal times, we have a floor down in central London, in Holborn, with more than 100 researchers. And it's a very nice space. And we really want to use that space, though, not just for the aggrandizement of UCL, but really to serve the broader, certainly London, UK, and international community about AI for hosting, for example, these kinds of events. We're also a founding member of the Alan Turing Institute, and very happy to partner with them on various activities. So this is what it actually would look like in normal times. We might be having this conference actually, at least some of us, physically here in this building in central London. It's a very nice location. If you can see over here, it's central London, the river is down here, and we're really pretty much in the heart of London itself. So this is a great location, and we feel it's very incumbent upon us to actually use that great location to actually provide a physical platform as well to help startup companies, social groups, etc. within London, and host all kinds of events around the area of AI. So from a research perspective, I would say our vision is very much that AI is still far from being solved. I think sometimes there's an impression, perhaps more in the general public, that it's kind of a done deal, that AI already exists and it's just about the application of AI. But I think at least from my perspective, and I think where the AI Center is driving, is that actually we are really very far away from the kinds of systems that we would like to get. So systems that can really fully replicate or even exceed human capabilities in things like natural language processing, visual processing, understanding of text, etc. So in that sense, these are huge challenges. I think we're just still at the foothills of these grand challenges in AI. And that's going to take a real collaborative effort, not just from people with mathematical skills and computational skills, but all kinds of other skills and input as well. So we certainly can't do that alone. And founding a center like the AI Center is actually an effort to try to get these groups to collaborate together to address those foundational challenges in AI. So we're certainly going to be, as I said before, supporting others who want to apply AI, but the core remit of this center itself, ultimately as a research question, is to try to address some of those grand challenges in AI, how to build those kinds of systems. And obviously we want to try to be supportive in terms of research and innovation as well. So just briefly, in terms of research, we've got about almost 30 principal investigators, including some award-winning folks. And we've got great strengths across things like natural language processing, computational modeling, particularly in vision, probabilistic modeling, reinforcement learning, and the mathematical analysis of machine learning and AI algorithms. So in terms of an environment, it's become to us increasingly clear that we need to have a much more open and collaborative research environment. The old days in which an individual academic might sit down and work with an individual student are actually quite long gone for us. We're really looking at collaborative efforts, and often the papers that students and researchers are writing involve multiple authors across different disciplines. And that kind of collaboration can only really happen in a very open environment. And related to that is links with industry, that they are absolutely vital for us. They really inform the kind of research which you're doing, and also they help us to get our research out there in the real world, have impact. And the reality is that a lot of the research that we're doing also with industry is highly collaborative, and the teams are extremely heterogeneous. And in order to make that happen, the only practical way is if we try to have very lightweight intellectual property arrangements. So again, the old-fashioned idea of, say, a company sponsoring an individual student and only getting the IP around that individual student is a little bit, we think, old-fashioned and actually not particularly practical in the AI arena. So as much as possible, we try to aim for very open research with very limited, sort of little IP, sort of like baggage, if you will. And we've been very lucky so far to have a great bunch of supporters who actually are signed up to that vision as well. So just briefly on training, we take a very much a skills-based viewpoint of learning. So we feel it's fine to have people who are taught to use, say, various tools in AI and machine learning, but it's also critical that we retain in education, the ability to equip students with the creative talent in AI. So in other words, rather than just being users of AI procedures and algorithms, can students create new algorithms? That's really, I think, a fundamental thing, particularly if you think that we're still very much in the early stages of AI. So at UCL in particular, we're very keen on the idea of teaching mathematics and the principles behind the algorithms. And we think this actually itself will lead to potentially new advances in technology. So if there's a real fundamental mathematical or algorithmic advance, there's often a corresponding business opportunity there. So we're very keen to make teaching and education as freely available and as widely available as possible. A lot of people at UCL have been involved in initiatives to write textbooks, many of which are free to download and to use. And UCL is also very keen, like many other academic institutions, to support education through summer schools, etc., both here in the UK and internationally. So this is, I think, a very important initiative, particularly in the subject so pervasive as AI. And we also teach a whole bunch of master's programs at UCL. We're graduating more than 150 students per year in the broad area of AI. And I think this shows actually how big the community is getting, you know, how widespread AI is and how important it is for us to continue to train high quality graduates. We also have a PhD program in AI. So this is actually a sort of an idea to look at the foundational challenges in AI, but also we have, as I said before, the idea that if you do come up with a genuine advance, there is a business opportunity there. So we're also very interested in training PhD students, those who are interested in this, to have entrepreneurial skills and use them to make deep tech startups. And that's really vital, we think, not just for the UK, but for the world more generally. You know, we really feel that AI can be used to, you know, remove some of the drudgery, the sort of very simple things that people are doing, which actually could be replaced by computers. So we're very keen to do that, and we're very happy to be one of 16 centres in the UK which is supported by the government to train PhD students. And there's a whole bunch of partners that are helping us to do that. And this is you know, a big initiative that you know, we're very happy to discuss with people at some point. So just briefly on innovation, the AI Centre itself is playing a supporting role in innovation. We have a bunch of partner programs, for example, an industry partner program. So if you're an industry partner and you'd like to learn how to help us and we can help you, please do get in touch with myself. We also have an industry network to support networking between companies. And you'll hear a little bit more today about the Conception X program, which is also about training a new generation of entrepreneurs. And yeah, we have a whole bunch of companies that have come out of UCL. Certainly some are better known than others. DeepMind is a very well-known UCL startup in AI, but there's a whole bunch of others which in total you know, mean that we've actually generated a large amount of financial and we hope societal benefit out of AI. So that was all I wanted to say very briefly. So please do get in touch. There's some contact details here. And yeah, I'm very happy to see so many people joining, and I hope that this is going to be a great day for all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I think we have like 5 minutes. Can I just, some people have asked a few questions.
Sure.
Can I just, one of the questions I think is quite easy one is, when the application for the CDT will start?
They are open already. So if you go to this website here, the ucl.ac.uk AI Centre, you'll see a page in there about training, and you'll be able to apply there.
Yeah. There's another one which is about funding for international applicants. Is there any funding for that?
Yes, we have funding. It's a little bit limited, but we do have every year some significant amount of funding for international students. So it depends a little bit where you're from and what your background is. But yes, absolutely, we have money available, and watch that space. I mean, things are a little bit complicated with Brexit right now, so you know, but things are changing there. But absolutely, don't let that put you off. Please do apply if you're from overseas. We do have funding for you.
Another one is related to maybe potential like summer internships or summer programs at the AI Center, or maybe even students from the AI Center doing internships. Is a common feature there.
Yeah, so one way around is that a lot of the students of those 150 master students each year, they're all doing projects, and many of those projects are done with industry partners. So those are 3-month-long projects, and the students then work with that industry partner for that time. It's usually on a quite a detailed sort of research idea. So there are other internship programs actually running at UCL as well, but our one that we run typically from the AI Center is a little bit more on the research side rather than, say, the internship side of things. But certainly, if you are interested in getting in touch about either internships or projects, then please do get in touch. If you're an industry partner who could offer to support either an internship or a research project, so for example, a 3-month master's project, please do get in touch, and we'll put you in contact with the appropriate people at UCL. We're very, very keen on that, and it's actually one of the best ways to start a relationship with UCL. Many of our sort of long-term partners we have going back over many years actually began as through master's projects. So this is an extremely effective and very cost-effective way to begin to work with us and to interact with UCL.
Yeah, there's another one, just two final questions before we have to go to the keynotes. Is one question related to that there is a social scientist also doing research in the area of AI. Is it possible for the social science research to join the center? Is it also a possibility?
Yes, it could well be. So please do get in touch. I'm very happy to consider all requests. We're very keen, as I said before, certainly from our perspective, AI isn't it's not just a closed thing around the mathematics and computer science. It really touches on a whole range of other areas. So please do get in touch if you're a social scientist as well and you're interested in how we could link with you or potentially help you, either if you're at UCL or outside of UCL.
Yeah. Last question, which is about entrepreneurship. There's a question about, do you think entrepreneurship is a catalyst of theoretical development in AI, or it's a contradiction in your view?
I think it's a catalyst. It's actually the reality is that the vast majority of people who get a training, even at PhD level in AI, are not going to become full-time academics. That's just either there's not the numbers there, places, or, people want to use this training to actually do something impactful in the real world with that. So entrepreneurship is actually a very strong driving force right now. We're very, very keen to have students come who've got exciting ideas how to use what the skills and knowledge they're going to develop to actually make an impact in the real world. So I think it's extremely exciting. If you can come up with an algorithm that can exceed the state of the art in, for example, computer vision, that's amazing. It's great in terms of the research, but it's also great for the potential impact it could have in society. That's really, I think where we're at. I think it's one of the very exciting things about AI that, you can actually come up with academic and intellectual improvements, which actually can quite quickly get translated into something which has impact in the real world. Now, of course, there are good and bad things about that. There are a lot of societal challenges around these things as well. And I think that's, we'll certainly be discussing some of them later today about, the positive and negatives about that. But overall, we view AI as a potential force for good. And, we were very keen that, we see entrepreneurship as part of that, it's not something that's just purely an academic sort of like a ivory tower industry, if you like. It's really about using these techniques to impact and make people's lives better through things like entrepreneurship as well. So yeah, absolutely. We're very proud to, as I mentioned before, we have been quite successful at UCL, and we have a real pipeline of going from, say, master's graduates to PhD graduates to the academics themselves, leading startups and being involved with, continuing to be involved with startups after that.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, David, for your opening remarks. I was really grateful for you to have made this initial opening for our inaugural conference.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you as a Zoom thing, could you give me the host privilege again? So I can...
Yeah, hopefully I can switch it back to you now.
Yeah. We love Zoom, right?
Yes. Are you back? Have you got the hosting back?
Not yet.
Okay, let me just let me escape out of Zoom. That may force it to give it you back.
Yep. Okay, excellent. Thanks, David, for your opening remarks. Now, just as an initial comment, we had some technical issues with some of the links of the Zoom, so we may need to change. So you may receive for some of the parallel sessions, not all of them. So you may receive some emails about changing the links for some of them, but I'll let you all know when the time comes. Okay. just to open the floor to our main keynote speaker, Dr. Kiki Leutner. Kiki is replacing Professor Mihaela van der Schaas. Mihaela is in Los Angeles right now, so imagine, I think it's about 8 hours difference. So we had to give her I mean, end up getting stuck because of the whole COVID lockdown, etc. It's not her fault. So I'm really glad to have Kiki doing this live and doing her presentation on modern day divination, how AI is making decisions about you. So just to give a brief bio about Dr. Franziska Leutner. She is a business psychologist and data scientist at UCL. She's also director of Assessment, Innovation, and High Review, where she develops innovative data-driven assessments that are fair and psychometrically valid. Her academic work is published in peer-reviewed journals, including work on the intersection of machine learning and psychometrics. She's an expert in innovative psychometric assessment, personality theory, and behavior analytics. And I'm very, very glad to have her with us today. So I'll just open the floor to Dr. Kiki, and I'll let Emre be chairing this session. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Kiki, please start. Just before Kiki starts, please everyone do post your Q&As in the function at the bottom. And thanks, Kiki. I won't take any more of your time. Kiki, you are muted at the moment.
All right, yeah, awesome. No, I had to put the screen share on.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Already now, just to make sure you're seeing the right part of the screen. All right, hi everyone. Really glad to be here today, and thank you for having me. And congrats on organizing such a cool conference, Emre and Adriano. So yes, Adriano has kind of given an overview of what I do. I'm based at UCL, and so I work in academia, but also in industry. And I guess I'm an example of one of those people that learn a bit about AI and then go into industry and start applying it. And I worked with a startup here in London where we used AI to build a new generation of psychometric assessments. And I talk about that a little bit later, what that means. And we sold that startup successfully to HireView, where I work now. So it was a really interesting experience doing that. But I also work in academia and I teach at UCL. All right, so today I talk to you about what AI knows about you, what that information really means. And my perspective is a little bit unique in that my background is in psychology, but I was lucky enough at UCL to do my PhD between the computer science and psychology departments and really learn some of the machine learning skills as well and bring those two worlds together. So I talk about the different things that we can infer about someone based on your data using machine learning. I talk about why that matters and what that information really tells us about you or your future. Adriano kind of gave this title, modern day divination. So what I mean by that is that in this context, we're using AI to predict people's futures or to find out how they might act in the future. And I'll hopefully explain to you why some of that is well researched and well founded. And then we'll also talk a little bit about what we should look at, and David has touched on that, the whole field of ethics and AI. So what we should look at when we evaluate algorithms, in particular algorithms that are, making decisions about humans or are making predictions about people. And all of your lives will be touched by those algorithms and probably already are. If you're looking for jobs, if you're looking for credit, all of those kind of things will be affected by algorithmic decisions. And I'll talk about some of the key concepts and ethics that we might think about in that particular area of AI. And hopefully I'll make clear to you that there are some advantages to using AI. So I think we've moved from this wild west of using AI for everything, and it's going to solve all of our problems, to suddenly realizing that there are ethical problems with this widespread application of AI and that we need to consider some of the effects that it's having on society, not just from a tech point of view, but from a social sciences point of view, etc. But I do think that overall, if we use it in the right way, we can improve a lot of the processes that we're currently using with AI, even with the downfalls that it has. All right, so let's get started. My background, I started out really as a psychologist, and I became really interested in the field of individual differences psychology, which is a little bit different from general psychology, where people maybe try to learn about how humans work in general. In individual differences, we kind of ask ourselves, is everyone completely different? Are they all the same? Or is it probably somewhere in the middle where we're different in some ways and the same in other ways? And that's exactly what we try to quantify and measure and figure out how that relates to the different choices we make in life and how we live our lives and what we might achieve. And obviously this is an age-old question for humanity, and lots of different fields look at this. It's not just science, it's also culture. So if you think about things like credit scoring, that's widely used, where you kind of have this idea that different people carry different risks. And you have things like horoscopes, a lot less scientific, but still the idea that you can give specific recommendations to different people based on their characteristics, etc. So as psychometricians, we try to do that in a scientific way and figure out a way to measure people. And obviously the arrival of big data and machine learning has blown that field wide open, because we now have so much data available that goes right into answering the kind of questions that we like to address as individual differences psychologists. So that brings us to the first kind of big questions: what algorithms can learn about you. And I think we all have this notion now that, yes, our data is everywhere, everyone knows everything, Google knows everything about me, they can observe every move that I make. But what does that really mean? And what can we extract from what kind of data? I think it warrants taking a bit of a closer look, and a look from the psychology lens. So I'll be going through that. A question that I always ask my students is, would you rather, show me the contents of your purse, or I guess in this context, your living room or your Zoom background, or would you let an algorithm analyze your banking records? Like, what would you feel more uneasy with? And so from a bit of a historical point of view, as psychologists or as researchers who want to find out about people, we used to have to do that by directly asking questions. It was sort of the most practical way of doing it. So in the early days of individual differences psychology, you would also have observational studies that would be super tedious and impractical. So eventually these questionnaires emerged. I'm sure some of you have done them, if even in the most unscientific and basic form of a BuzzFeed quiz. But you just give people a few questions and make inferences about them. And the first of those structured tests kind of emerged in the 1920s with the first IQ tests, and they haven't changed much then for decades and decades. So eventually they were put on computers, but it was still the same thing. If you wanted to find out about someone, you'd have to get them to fill in a questionnaire. Same for kind of credit application, insurance applications, online dating, everything was based on these questionnaires that you'd have to fill in. And then technology came in and the internet came in, and we can use that technology to change formats, so we can still directly ask people to answer questions in a way but making those more interactive, like with playing a game. But we can also use data that they didn't provide for that purpose at all. And that's the kind of data that you just leave in your browsing history, in your social networks, on your phone with the apps that you download and where you go, which is, from a researcher's point of view, the perfect dream of a very structured, very standardized observational study. And of course, there's huge amounts of interesting data in there, and soon psychologists and researchers caught on to that and started looking at what we can really tell from that online data, how good data is that we can get from social networks, how well it relates to real life, etc. And we started seeing that there's really a whole lot that we can learn about people from that data. So I go through that a little bit. This was one of the first studies that came out by a team at Cambridge University. And they managed to collect a huge data set from Facebook, which was then the most used social network. And they kind of looked at what people had liked on Facebook as well as what they had posted, and started looking at what that can tell us about people's traits and attributes. And you can think of that would sort of apply to other networks nowadays as well, if you think about what you like on Instagram, etc. But the results were really quite interesting in that they could infer things that might seem a bit more obvious, like what gender you are, quite accurately. So in this graphic here, you can see the area under the curve, which is the metric we like to use when you predict a binary outcome. So whether someone's male or female, for example, and 1 would be a perfect prediction. You always get it right. 50 would be 50-50 chance, so you know better than a guess. And they were able to do it with 0.93, so almost a perfect prediction of gender. But then there's also traits that maybe seem less obvious, like whether your parents were still together when you were 21, they were still able to extract information about that, what religion you have, whether you drink alcohol. So lots of really quite private information about people that they were able to extract. And I think that was at the time a very interesting paper to come out, and still is today, that based on just your preferences that you publicly declare on whatever platform, we can get very detailed information about your demographics. And then you can take that a step further and look at personality, which obviously as psychologists we love. So personality is a description of your behavioral tendencies and preferences. And it's a way of describing how people are different from each other, right? So there are what we call the big 5 personality traits, which came out of decades of research, and they kind of wanted to find the most general personality traits that would still give a good description of people, because as you can imagine, there's hundreds of traits that you can measure someone on, you know, self-esteem, openness, entrepreneurialism, like everything. So we converge onto these 5 traits that are supposed to be a summary of all the different traits that someone can have, like a higher level order. So interestingly, with how you act on social media, we can predict those personality traits as well, and we can do it quite accurately. So here you're looking at correlations, which is different from the metric in the previous slide. And a correlation of 0.43, like they found for the openness trait, is rather high in this context. So there seems to be a strong relationship between what you post and how you act on social media and how open you are. And then that allows me to make all sorts of inferences about you. So openness means how much you like to learn new things. Maybe you're more interested in arts and different kind of cultural interests, and you're imaginative. And so based on how you act online, we can find that out about you, and you can do that on all 5 traits. And I'll talk a little bit about how that relates to your life and your future later on. But so they found that not only demographics, also personality can be predicted from social media likes. And then there are lots and lots of studies looking at language, which is one of the most informative pieces of data that we can get about a person. So this is independent of what network you're on. Anywhere where you leave language that you write, or even that you say, and then we can transcribe it, we can connect the words that you've said to different personality traits or different characteristics. Then there are lots of different papers who've done this, and where you can infer personality quite accurately from language use. And in this table, you can see some of the words that people use more that are more extrovert or more agreeable. So an extroverted person would more often use words like bar, restaurant, dancing, which is quite interesting, right? Extroversion is about how much you enjoy interacting with other people. And so you're literally talking about occasions where you'd interact with other people. So the research into personality and language is quite fascinating, but again, just to show you that anywhere where you type something and you write, someone can make those inferences about you. And of course, we have to ask ourselves a little bit, why is that the case? What are the algorithms picking up on? And there's lots of research that was done before we had this online data available that looked at where we can find traces of personality. And they found that we can look at your physical environment, your virtual environment, of course, the examples I showed, but also the kind of activities you engage in, products you like, the music you like. And this is a really cool study where they went into people's dorm rooms and got raters to kind of say what personality the person in the dorm room would have. And that correlated with the personality that the person self-reported on their questionnaire, which is quite interesting. So in the image here, you can see a dorm room. It's the same room, but inhabited by two different people. And so maybe on the right side, it's someone who's more open and more extrovert. And on the left side, it might be someone who's more conscientious and introvert. So there's a lot of research that went into kind of showing that traces of personality are everywhere around you. And then the digital environment is just a very well-structured place for us to go as researchers and find those connections. So why does that information matter? I think, like I said in the beginning, we're all aware that this data that we're leaving around, people have access to, and it's being used for marketing, etc. But now that we've seen a bit of what that information can tell us, demographic, personality information, why does it matter and what could that be used for? And quite simply put, your personality and your demographics predict your future behaviors and different life outcomes. And that's obviously relevant in a lot of different areas. And I talk about that a little bit and how it's being used. But so the idea is that it's not just, oh, people have all this information about you, so what? It means that they can take that information and they can look into the future and see what you're more likely to do next. And that's especially true at an aggregate level. So at a very individual level, it might be difficult to say exactly, what you might buy next as an individual. But if you're looking at hundreds of thousands of people, then you can detect those tendencies, and the information becomes even more useful, let's say. But I often get questions about that, oh, does my personality now determine my life outcomes? The answer is, on a group level, yes, but an individual can always be outside of that. So let's look at some of the outcomes. So of course, individual differences, researchers in particular have long looked at the relationship between personality and life outcomes. And actually looking at studies like this is one of the reasons why I find it so useful to look at your online data and behavioral traces in terms of personality, because by doing that, we can connect it to decades of research that we have available on, what personality actually means for life outcomes, or in the field where I work for recruitment, what it means for job performance, etc. Otherwise, we would just have a bunch of behavior data from the internet and we wouldn't know what that means. But this way we can connect it to decades of research. So in this example, it's a large study from 2007 where they looked at many different life outcomes, including mortality, so how old you're gonna become, divorce rates, breakups, earnings, your highest level of education. And they looked at social economic status, they looked at intelligence, and then they looked at personality. And in this chart in particular, you can see that mortality is influenced by your socioeconomic status, yes, but much more so by conscientiousness. So conscientiousness is a personality trait related to how orderly you are, whether you get things done on time, whether you like to complete tasks, all those kinds of things. And that seems to be related to mortality. And you could think that that might be because you're more likely to follow up with health appointments, you're more likely to organize your life in a way that's supportive to your health or your fitness, etc. But this is quite a fascinating study. And again, now if you think about what I could do with that information, if I can use your data to find out you're conscientious, and that tells me about your likelihood of getting divorced, dying early, your earnings, etc. Then now we're starting to see really cool research. This is from 2019 about personality and your chosen career. Many people have this notion that they want to figure out what would be the best career for them. And there's lots of attempts to try and solve that. But the truth is we haven't had the right data sets to do that yet. But this was a really great attempt looking at Twitter data where people post what their profession is. And then they can use your tweets, so the text that you've written on Twitter, to infer your personality. And they looked at what personality traits are more prominent in different professions. So each color is one of the traits. And if you look here on top, GitHub distributor, so those would be developers that post a lot in online forums. They tend to be more open, less agreeable. Then if you look at tennis professionals, I don't know why there seems to have been a lot of tennis professionals on Twitter. They seem to be more agreeable and conscientious, but less open. So this is, I think, very interesting, and it shows that personality might influence which career you choose or you stay in. And then finally, and I think this is the best researched and from my point of view, most interesting area, personality relates to your job performance and your career success. So in particular, cognitive ability and conscientiousness correlate quite strongly with extrinsic career success. So that's things like promotions, your salary, but they also correlate with supervisory rated performance. So I guess an indicator of how well you perform at work. And that's quite interesting, as you can imagine, if you're trying to recruit people. And often people tend to say, oh, those correlations are rather low depending on what field you come from, but I like to show this comparison with medical outcomes. So you can see that even the correlation between height and weight is comparable to those correlations between personality and extrinsic career success. Yeah, so hopefully that's shown you that A, we can measure your personality or things about you from your online data. B, that information is very relevant to your future and different life outcomes that different groups might have interest in. And so now comes the question of who's using that data and who does it serve, or how is it being applied? Now, obviously, there are lots of different industries and groups that might be interested in your future behavior, and most of those have by now jumped on this new world of data possibilities, let's say. So that includes, you know, any field that you can think of where I want to know something about people as individuals or as smaller groups. And that includes things like online dating, insurance companies who want to determine your risk, say your driving risk. I worked on an interesting project where we evaluated risk for young drivers because there's not much past driving behavior available for them, but you can measure their personality. Then lending, in a similar vein, news, so predicting who might be more influenced by what or interested in what, marketing and advertising, and of course the job market. I talked to you really briefly about advertising, and then I focus on jobs because that's what I work in most. So advertising has always kind of used, or since it's become online advertising, let's say, they've always used tags to help you define your audiences. But it's quite interesting to see just how refined those tags have become. And that's all thanks to the data that you're leaving on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, wherever you are, in your Google browser. So it's quite interesting if you ever want to venture into the advertising part of your Facebook or Instagram accounts. And you can see what tags are available to target people on. which can be quite fascinating. So you can literally buy a tag in US politics, whether someone's conservative or liberal. You can exclude or include people based on that. And with this targeting, I think another thing people always think is, oh, all the data is available about me, so what, I get more targeted advertising. But what it really means is that it's making advertising very cheap to advertise to very concrete groups. And we've seen how that can be exploited, say, in political advertising. But over to human resources and jobs. So I've shown you the connection between personality and job performance. And so the application of kind of personal data or algorithms in human resources is warranted just based on that, right? And talent, or who you want to recruit, is a huge concern of business, because we're increasingly also having knowledge workers and knowledge-based jobs, which are all reliant on talent, so not so much automated jobs anymore. And the more AI we have to take over automated jobs, the more that will be true. The cost of turnover is really high, so if you lose an employee and you have to hire someone new, it's costly to the business. Yet many new employees fail. And again, the idea is that if you can predict how someone might act in the future or how well they would do in a role, you can avoid that cost. And that's true at all levels, but in particular at the leadership level. I think we've all seen how costly bad leadership can be, and that's true in businesses as well. So what you typically find in HR is that a business has a problem whereby they have too many people applying for a job, and they don't have enough time to review all those applications, but they also know that if they miss out on the best candidates, it would be really costly to their organization. And so in HR, we've developed all sorts of methods to try and figure out who the best employees might be. And this is where it becomes really interesting, because those methods involve algorithms. Even from before machine learning and artificial intelligence, we had simple algorithms based on those kind of questionnaires that I showed in the beginning. And we have decades and decades of research evaluating those different selection methods. So some are more structured, others are less structured. But so a work sample test works really well at identifying the best performing employees. Structured interviews work really well. Intelligence tests work really well. But then also things like personality tests work quite well. What doesn't work well is demographic information, work experience. Interviews that aren't structured don't work quite as well as structured interviews. But we have these decades of research showing us what methods work. And some of those involve, like I said, simple algorithms like personality assessments, intelligence assessments, structured interviews as well. They involve structured assessments where we ask you questions, you answer them, and then we have some sort of algorithm to score the answers. And because that is the case, the industry has developed these kind of standards for what we need to ask of the algorithms. And this I find quite interesting, because as we're moving to using AI for those algorithms, in the HR industry, we keep accountable to those standards, but that's not true in many of the other industries that might use your personal data. So when you're applying to a job and they're using AI to score your job application, they still have to comply with those standards that were developed in the 1970s, I think. And the standards, I think, have a very good basic idea that we should keep in mind when using AI in other fields as well. And it's that you make a decision about people, whether they get a job or not, whether they get a loan or not, whatever the decision is. And then you want to make sure that no group within your applicants is being disadvantaged. So if you compare, say, males, females, or different ethnicities or different age groups, you want to make sure that one group isn't massively more successful than the other group. And there's different ways of defining the level of discrepancy that's acceptable. But the 4/5 rule is kind of the rough rule, which would mean you can't have more than 80% less in one group than the other, or more than 20% less. So if you have 100 male applicants and 100 female applicants, and you select 100 of the male applicants, and 90 of the female, that's fine. But if you select 79 of the female, then that's not fine. So it's kind of defining what level of difference we're able to accept in how the algorithm scores you. But this is, I think, a really interesting key concept when we think about algorithms making decisions about people. And of course, I've talked to you about these methods that we've tested in HR in particular, some of which involve algorithms already. But AI is also bringing in something new, right? So not only do we have to comply to the standards that we've already set for making automated decisions about people, but we can also use the methodology available in AI to advance those standards further. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that. So we used to use our algorithms, and selection used to be based on really simple questionnaires, let's say. Now we can do that using games, using language. We've talked about how we can use language to predict personality. That's often done through video interviews. Maybe some of you are applying for jobs with video interviews. So when they involve an automated scoring, that's all based on this idea that we can use your language to predict personality and predict different traits about you. So that means that instead of having a simple scoring, like we used to with questionnaires, we now use machine learning algorithms to extract your personality information, for example. And in that algorithm lies the potential to optimize for fairness. And I'll explain a little bit what I mean by that. And this is a process that we weren't able to do with questionnaires, but we are able to do with when we use artificial intelligence to evaluate job applicants. So say you take a video interview, we take the information that you've given us in the video interview, mostly language, and we predict, say, your competency based on whatever personality trait, let's say conscientiousness. We can do that, and then we can also do the same thing and build an algorithm to predict your gender. And by doing that, we figure out which parts of the algorithm, so which features are related to gender more so than they are related to what we want to measure, like your conscientiousness. And that might be features like using certain words, maybe having a higher or lower pitched voice, etc. And we can then take out those features and preserve only features that are related really to your conscientiousness and not so much to your gender. And so the result would be an algorithm that has no adverse impact. So it makes equal rates of selections for men and women, but it also still strongly predicts conscientiousness. And so this is something that we weren't able to do with, say, classic psychometric tests used in selection, but that we are able to do when we start using artificial intelligence. And I think it's one of the examples of where AI can be really useful in helping us advance our goal of fair selection methods. And I've told you that I've worked with a startup and now HireView in creating those kind of AI-driven assessments. And we've seen that when we use these methods for eliminating gender bias, that we actually create assessments that have less gender bias compared to traditional assessments. So this would be an intelligence test that uses traditional questions and scoring methods. And then this is an AI-based intelligence test where we can essentially optimize for fairness and take out gender differences, which to me is quite an encouraging result and a good benefit of using AI-based scoring methods. But this is also a very new methodology, and it's still in discussion in the in the psychometrics community, in the AI community. And so that brings us to the last question, whether algorithms are fair and how we should evaluate them. I guess I've biased you a little bit with this last story that I've told you, that we can increase fairness if we use AI-based scoring models. But obviously that's not the only thing to consider, in particular when we're talking about algorithms that are making decisions about people. You have different concerns for AI in different areas of application. So I think one concept that the field of AI ethics is moving towards is looking at different stakeholders, what the algorithm is being used for, and in that context, what does fairness mean? So I think in the context of making decisions about people, we've kind of talked a bit about this outcome parity, so that we shouldn't select people of a certain group more than we select people of another group, and defining what really does more mean. Some differences will always occur. Is it just statistical significance? Is it more? Is it less? So that's kind of saying when an algorithm is making decisions about people, it shouldn't disadvantage groups. And we define groups by what we think is important in society at that point in time. At the moment, we look at things like gender, ethnicity, and age on a continuous basis in application. Of course, that doesn't mean that other aspects like disabilities aren't important, but often there's practical limitations, like you wouldn't have enough data. But then there's another concept that's really interesting, more from the tech side, which is accuracy. So not only looking at the final outcome of the algorithm, but also looking at what goes into the algorithm and whether it achieves similar accuracy for different people. And I think many of those discussions we've seen in the press. So when you see certain systems that don't work for black faces, but do work really well for white faces, when you look at transcription algorithms, they tend to work better for male voices than for female voices. So if you think about those algorithms being used as part of your algorithm, then you need to make sure that they have a comparable or acceptable level of accuracy for different groups. And those differences are not trivial, and there's a lot of interesting research in that area as well. So yes, you want to look at outcomes. So is the final decision the algorithm makes or recommendation the algorithm makes, is it equal between groups or approximately equal? But then you also want to look at accuracy of the different elements in the algorithm and how it compares. Then another really important concept, and I started out talking about this as something with a huge potential, right? So that we have all this behavior data available about people now online, and not for free, but online and structured. But the ethical question that it raises is whether we should use data that you've provided for a different purpose for our goals. So if you've provided, posts on Instagram because you want to become an influencer or inform your network, and I then use that data to advertise to you or make decisions about your credit worthiness or insurance decisions about you, selection decisions about you, what implications does that have? Is that fair? Is it enough to just put it in a terms and conditions that you agree to it, etc.? That I think is a very interesting question. And I think one of the reasons why we don't really use social media data or browser data in recruitment and selection, because it would just be inappropriate for an employer to snoop on your social media. But in marketing, it's widely used, right? So that's a really important consideration. What did you provide the data for? And then what are we using it for? And then also the third thing that I think people tend to forget about a little bit is what are we comparing the algorithm to? So in job selection in particular, there's criticism like, oh, you're using algorithms to judge people. That's not right. It should be a human making the decision. But A, is that really true? Would a human be making the decision, or would your application just be thrown out because there's no capacity? But also, if we do compare to human decisions, how accurate are those? How well do they work? How does the algorithm compare? So it's kind of this idea of looking at the algorithm in context. So even if the algorithm has some problems with accuracy, etc., is it worse than what the alternative is, or does it help us to improve on a flawed situation? And I think the huge potential of algorithmic decisions is that they are structured, measurable, and centralized, so that you can monitor them and adjust them with, you know, the click of a button or by releasing a new and adjusted model. Whereas if you have human decisions, they are distributed, they are chaotic, they are intuitive and based on individuals. So it's very tough to implement new decision making in humans across the board. So you would have to train everyone, etc. So that's, I think, a huge potential of algorithmic decisions. But just to give you this idea of what are we replacing with the algorithm, and how well does the alternative work? So I hope I've given you some ideas about what data we have about you, what it means, how it can be collected, what it could tell us about your future. Gone a little bit over the application HR in particular. And I'll leave you with these links where you can try it out yourself, and you can get a little personality profile based on your online data. Please do get in touch with me if you have research projects, if you want to do PhDs, if you want to study individual differences in or computation and psychometrics. Yeah, please do get in touch.
Thank you, Kiki. That was excellent. Really appreciate your presentation and keynote. We've had so many questions. The first bunch of questions, I was just clustering them, was about how to get in touch and if the the slides will be available and the video, etc. We'll be uploading this to the UCL AI Center YouTube channel, so people shouldn't worry about the availability of the presentation. As you've just put your email address there and your Twitter handle, so I guess people can get in touch. So let's move to the question and answer. We've only got a few minutes for this because we have to jump off a little early because we're going to be transitioning to the other parallel sessions. But it looks to me like there's kind of two general kind of areas of questions. The first one is about the psychometrics. So you made a point which seems to me kind of empirically true, that on the aggregate level, especially the bigger the data set, if you will, the bigger the kind of numbers we're talking about, the more almost deterministic it feels. But at an individual level, obviously an individual can be, has its own agency and so on and so forth. So can I ask about, do you think that these systems, even on an aggregate level, is there a sense in which you're just describing an event, or is there a sense in which you're determining an event through let's say, psychometric analysis? Because a lot of the ethical questions were kind of clustered around, settled in that kind of space.
Yeah, I mean, we can tell that Emre is a philosopher.
Oh, sorry.
These questions. No, I mean, it's really interesting. In just a very concrete example in selection, it is deterministic in the sense that we often recruit people based on their characteristics, right? And then we determine whether they were successful based on the people that we've recruited, right? We never recruit everyone and then see whether people that we determined wouldn't be successful based on their characteristics would actually be successful. So in that sense, then the decisions that we make inform the data that we're going to get later on. I think in other areas, like especially advertising and political influencing and marketing, it can be deterministic as well, right? Because by targeting certain groups, you're influencing and changing those groups as well. But yeah.
So another kind of, just if I take the liberty of kind of putting questions together, another question, the ethics question. And I think you addressed a lot of it, especially in the last section of your talk, in terms of fairness issues and the kind of strategies that are put in place to kind of, and the standards that are put in place to ensure that the systems remain as fair as possible. I want to kind of flip the question, because a lot of the time people have a lot of moral panic in this space. Is there a sense in which actually through systems, because their performance is so explicit, it could be possible in some dimensions that actually it's fairer than, let's say, human black box decision making?
Yes, absolutely. So I think in recruitment, that's true. So in recruitment, you can look at overall metrics and see that they improve if you use any assessment or any structure at all, and then AI-based assessments in particular. So you see that people who use these technologies, they tend to have a more diverse cohort that they recruit, etc. In other contexts, like advertising, again, not to hate on them, but it's absolutely not true, right? So what Facebook has done has caused absolute chaos, I would say. So I think that's also because it's a much more complex system and they're changing a whole industry and communication and influence. So it's a lot broader space than a single recruitment decision. But I think that is the big potential of AI, that especially if we apply it in a reasonable way, you know, supporting single decisions in a very structured way, then it can be really helpful. If we now start to redesign whole industries and throwing out all of the previous regulation that we had, then it becomes dangerous, which is why I also like to talk about the regulation that we do have in HR and in selection, and using algorithms within that regulation, which it's not necessarily true for all areas where we're using AI. In some areas, the industries have been able to like kind of define themselves as new industries and escape regulation, and I don't think that's right. Yeah.
So just as a kind of corollary to that point, there's a few questions here about, let's call them protected characteristics, and race, etc. There's some questions about proxy, let's say being able to find them vis-a-vis kind of as proxy variables and so on and so forth. I wonder, Kiki, if you can speak a little bit on the fact that there's been, maybe, do correct me if I'm wrong, a shift in terms of anonymizing isn't the solution. And I asked that to motivate the question a little bit more. We've had almost path dependency because of GDPR, where privacy is seen as this kind of primary force. But can you speak a little bit about how maybe that might have changed, or why that matters in terms of the fairness discussion?
Yeah. And again, I think it really depends on context. So you can see it's right to protect that data because you can see how it can be misused. And we've seen that with, you know, Facebook, where certain flats, or I think financing for accommodation, wasn't advertised to certain ethnic groups. But then in the context of recruitment, I also rely on having demographic data to test whether my algorithm is fair to different groups. And then you run into this conundrum, and different countries handle it differently. So in France, you can't ask job applicants about their ethnicity, age, gender, so we can't test how fair the algorithm is. In other countries, you're allowed to do it, and then that data is very helpful to us in that context. And then also in the algorithm build itself, there's this debate about whether, you know, that process that I've described to you, where we let the algorithm predict gender and then take out those features to make it, in a sense, gender neutral, or as gender neutral as possible, and take out those hidden proxies. Some argue that we shouldn't do that because in a way then the algorithm isn't blind to gender, age, and ethnicity, right? But it's this kind of circular argument, because if you have proxies in there, but you can't use the outcome to identify the proxies, then how can you make it blind? So it's a very strange area at the moment, but I hope that we'll come out of it with a kind of criteria that I talked about a little bit more, which is accuracy for different groups, parity of outcomes, and not so much focused on the details of how you make that happen.
Yeah, just on a kind of final point, Kiki, maybe this is a more speculative question, or how do you see things going? One perspective could be that there's a kind of hype cycle. I remember blockchain a couple of years ago was going to solve the world. Sometimes I often ask myself, because I'm kind of in the eye of the storm, is there this sense in which AI is going to solve all humanity's problems? And are we in a hype at the moment? Or do you see that, or the other extreme is that there's this kind of technological determinism where it's just automate. So in a more broad sense, not just from the industry perspective, also your academic perspective, how do you see that as a kind of closing remark?
Yeah, I think at the moment we're trying to build something very complex, when really the systems that we have at the moment are helpful for making very concrete decisions. So we need to like turn it down a notch and use AI for those more concrete problems, rather than dreaming of, building a whole city with AI. We want to apply it to things like who might be a good employee. Yeah, so I think if you pick the right problems, AI is super helpful, and I don't see a stop to that. I think it will be used more and more.
Kiki, one thing I will say in closing is there's often this idea that that the developers or the people in the AI industry are a bunch of, let's say, fascists in the basement of some terrible building, going out of their way to create these kind of horribly biased and misogynistic systems. Thank you for your presentation, and also evidencing that people in this space are actually much more conscious of this and are not so the depictions are not necessarily true. So I'm just going to finish there. Please, everyone, do reach out. We're just going to close slightly early because we've got a bunch of parallel sessions about to start at 11 o'clock. Just to note to everyone that we had one or two of the links may change for some of the sessions, not all of them. So please do check your emails. And thanks again, Kiki. And thanks everyone for joining the opening session. Thanks again to David. And great, looking forward to the rest of the sessions today. I think we'll leave here. Thanks, Kiki.